you know, here we're lucky enough to have the Peck Elementary Lab School where anyone can really go and practice their teaching abilities. And I was just curious, in your either undergrad or graduate studies, if there were any sort of teaching opportunities or experiences or classes that helped you to develop your teaching skills, and if there were anything in particular that you wanted, to talk about, or if there was anything that you wish you had more of.
I mean, for me, I suppose my first real exposure to the breakdown of pedagogy and how things get started was, one of the electives I took as an undergrad was Mimi Swag's class, was teaching kids, and that was part of the class was teaching paired with young kid at some point in the semester after things like the groundwork had been laid for us, and that was a real eye-opening experience in terms of just really from square one, just how you build upon that. So, again, it meant a lot at the time, but it meant a lot more later on as I began to have to put the pieces together for myself.
I can't remember exactly when I did my first teaching, but it was definitely when I was doing my undergrad at Michigan. And my teacher had some high school and middle school kids that he wanted me to work with. And I would sit in on some of their lessons, or he and I would at least talk really pretty much in a lot of depth about what he wanted me to do with them. And that was kind of fun. There was a young woman who a few years ago recorded the Tchaikovsky Concerto with the London Symphony. She's done okay. She had little girl sound, and she was 8, so she was allowed to have little girl sound. But he decided she needed to learn to play with a bigger sound. And so I got a couple of my brass playing friends in the very thin-walled practice rooms, and we got in the middle and had a lesson for weeks on end. Bigger sound. But a lot of that kind of observing the lessons and then going and working with these kids on technique or helping them learn to practice. Patty Kopek, Zuckerman's assistant, asked if I would like to be her assistant in the pre-college at Manhattan School, and I said yes. And then she told me what I'd have to do, which was sit through a school year of Saturdays watching her teach and take notes. And it was 8 to 5 every Saturday. That woman never left the room. She is a monster. She just goes on. I mean, I love her dearly. She goes on with not a breath. I mean, she's focused. And of course, I was going to get you some coffee. But watching her take, however many students that is, through a year was incredible. And I would go work with several of them every week. And she'd tell me which ones every week, 3 or 4 usually. I did that without pay for a year. And then I got to be on faculty at Manhattan School, the preparatory division, and have my own studio. I can say one of my horror stories from early teaching. I didn't realize it was a horror story then. But I was at Meadowmount, and I was working as ship's assistant. And I mean, I was all of 18 or 19 or something. And the young man that I was helping, 13, and so 18-year-old girl, 13-year-old boy, they're far apart in age, right? And we were working, and he was kind of a rowdy kid, and he did not practice, and all my friends who were counselors had been, carrying on about how he was just a mess and was terrorizing the dorm and all this kind of stuff, and he was irritating the heck out of me in lessons. And I think part of me probably resented the fact that I was having to stand there and work with this kid who absolutely had no interest in what he was doing, or so I thought. And apparently one day I had a little sit-down talk with him, and it told him he either needed to get his act together or quit. And So it turns out years later he becomes good friends with my sister. And I saw him again at my sister's wedding. And he apparently quit because of what I had said. And, I mean, look, he's a very successful Wall Street banker. We don't need to feel real sorry for him.
He's taking all of our money.
He doesn't play much anymore, so he's doing okay. But that really, that was a real hard lesson to learn early on in teaching, that just how much impact my words had on him. I think there were probably other reasons he quit, but he liked telling my sister that he left. He continued studying for a good period of time after that.
It's fascinating when I hear the amazing things you both have done. I am entirely self-taught. I don't know. I think I once went to Tim and said, Tim, because I had students. I had a few students at Oberlin, and no one at all told me or knew what I was doing, and I sure didn't. And then at Stony Brook, I just did my best to get as many students as I could, just to pay the bills, and I learned all over them. I just did. Who knows, I started to. I was thinking a lot about what I was doing, so I don't think I was too horrible. I was thinking very carefully, I would, I remember once or twice I asked him, and he said, "Yeah, I don't know." So I sort of said, "Oh, okay," or he'd sort of say, "Well, something about their elbow or something," and so I learned a lot, actually, in my very first teaching job from just observing my colleagues and listening to their students and listening to them talk about their students and their students talk about them, and then, and watching them teach and watching juries and watching the way the students evolved and saying, oh, this person is using this kind of technique with this student and it's really working, or why this student's really stagnant, whatever they're offering isn't working, I better find out what it is so I don't do it. And it was entirely self-assembled. So that's, I guess I've been doing it long enough that maybe I'm beginning to know what I'm doing, so that's my experience, how that emerged.
I have another one that's kind of related, teaching related. It's so important to go back to basics, even at the collegiate level, and I'm very interested in teaching beginning string players, the little ones at the elementary level. And I was just wondering, there are a lot of, I guess, techniques that get the student to where they need to be, and there are some people that think, well, if it's not the thing or it's not the it, then why go onto this separate model to get there? Like, should you start the student in guitar position, or should you just start them the way it's played on the shoulder? And I was just wondering if there are any, I guess, pet peeve type methods or, I guess, thoughts about basic technique type stuff. Like I know with Suzuki, sometimes it's a vocal, the thumb goes on the bottom, and then they transfer it up. Some people prefer to just start them here, but how sometimes that baby step might help. And I was just wondering what your thoughts were on some starting students and kinds of methods you agree with, and some that you're a little bit questionable on.
Yeah, well, that could be another long discussion.
Yeah.
I have I'll just tell you from my personal experience. I was
there was an idea at the time, and my first teacher was actually a student of my grandmother's, an advanced student, a very advanced student, and she had had some Suzuki training, and but somehow had come across this notion that the student would be much more strongly grounded if they didn't have to use the bow for a while. They could just establish the left hand, and pizzicato works perfectly adequately for doing that. And so it was a number of months before I did anything with the bow. And I think that was bad. I just personally, I mean, for my entire career, it wasn't until my mid-20s that I finally felt like my bow arm was at the same place as my left. And it took me that long to get them in sync. And I don't know, would I have felt that way anyway? Well, who knows? I mean, that's the problem with our field. There's no way to actually, I told you, I was interested in the sciences, and there's no way to experiment short of your life's teaching, and you get to see enough students and try enough things. And then, of course, no one believes you. Or everyone believes you, but for the wrong reasons, right? So so that is an example of kind of good thinking gone, I think, awry. And most of these things, most gimmicks, I think, end up that way. The Suzuki thing, if you talk to a Suzuki person, they have there's a certain age range in which that's appropriate, and there's certain kinds of, they're constantly looking for different signs of coordination and where the development of the coordination is as to when that fine motor control has reached the point where it makes more sense to make that move. It's a pretty sophisticated technique, actually, as it unfolds if it's done properly. But like a lot of things, it can be done quite horribly. And then it becomes, I think, a negative. So any technique done exactly right is probably going to be better than another technique done poorly in teaching pedagogy. But I'm sure there's extremes.
I've been trying to think of some early technical thing that sets in that holds people back. Make a list of 100 problems we see that kind of probably started real early and didn't get fixed for whatever reason, and plagued somebody through their life. Often we kind of learn to work around those. If I could trill without putting my wrist out, I would, and somewhere along the way I didn't learn to, and maybe it's just my wrist is weird. I don't know, but if I need a really fast, I know exactly what awful hand position I have to get for a really fast trill. And, who's to say if that's somebody taught me wrong really early, or if that's just the peculiarity of me. I don't know. I'm often more concerned about just sort of the lack of attention given to things. I hear people say, "Oh, it doesn't matter. She's not going to go on into music, so it doesn't matter what she does. It doesn't matter." And I dislike that on several. I dislike that on several fronts. I dislike the idea that oh, it doesn't matter what you do. Just that whole thing kind of gets to me. That I'm not sure that's a good line to feed kids. It's sort of the mediocrity is okay with us line. And I by no means have any expectation that everybody needs to be fantastic in everything. I can make a long list of things I'm not good at. But if I'm, early on setting that example that if you're going to put your time into this, let's try to do it right. Let's try to, even if that time is 15 minutes a day, let's make those 15 minutes a day really count for something. And that seems to me to fall through too often. It's, oh, well, they're not going to go on into music, so who cares about it? And then what winds up happening is that actually 3 of them want to go on in music, and nobody ever fixed those things. And so now they want to go be in music. And nobody made them get private lessons early on. so they could get extra attention and progress further. Nobody corrected their position. Nobody said, you really can't hold your thumb like that. Because, we're not going to, And it turns out they do. And so that actually strikes me as much more sad than any argument about.
I don't have any experience starting a student. I often come into contact, as a teacher with kids that are just, developing their foundation in that way. But just thinking, these guys were sharing some thoughts that, some of the things that I do see even high school and I guess mainly high schools that I think is maybe not done them any favors, and things like how long some kids live with tape on the fingerboard or tape on their bow. I think I have no problem with those things being used by a private teacher, by an orchestra director. There are certain reasons why it makes a lot of sense to try to get if it's going to help a group play better in tune or something. But I think a lot of times those aids become crutches because there's not as much monitoring as to when they should come off, for the students' benefit, and so they can really be developing the ear training and the muscle and the muscle memory for where these things are, or for bow distribution, how they kind of outlast their purposefulness and they kind of hold back the kids. So let's use wisely and for the right period of time.